Hello there, everyone. This is Dan. So I'm doing this little video because I've had some people ask about making cases for cameras or cases for accessories, and I want to make it as easy as possible so you can measure things as accurately as possible. If I'm making a case for something, I want it to fit well and not be too loose and not be too tight. It needs to be just right, so to speak, if you all remember that nursery story about the bears. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right. Well, I want to make it just right. So with that, I'm gonna show you how I have found to be the most accurate and easy way to go about measuring stuff. Now, if you're not a mechanical person or somebody who's worked with tape measures and micrometers and dial calipers or calipers in general, sometimes reading things can be a little bit tedious. That's okay. I like to use the metric system, so I have a fancy tape measure here. I use a metric system even though I am based in the United States, but I can equally work accurately with imperial, inches, feet, miles. But for what I do with primarily sewing, it's easier to use the metric system because it's based off of a series of tens. So seeing that I also have quite a few customers around the world, and here in the United States, we're kind of an outlier compared to the rest of the world in that we use the imperial system still. The rest of the world, for the most part, uses metric. So with that, I can extrapolate both ways and I can cross-reference both ways. But I just figured I'd show you a little demonstration as to how to accurately measure things. Because cameras, I don't have my camera here in the shop with me, but we can simulate this speed ring being, let's just call it a 4x5 camera. So what normally you would want to measure the maximum extremities of your camera or whatever item it is. So if it has, let's just say it has knobs out here, you would want to measure including the knobs. So the maximum width would be including the knobs, whatever at the widest point is. And then the same thing with the what I call the depth, which is the front to back. So if the camera, let's just say this is a folding camera and it's collapsed down so it's closed, you would measure from the front, so this extremity here, all the way to the rear. So if there's any bumps, or if you have a ground glass protector, or if there is anything that sticks out past the camera, you'd want to include that. So that dimension would be the depth. And we can call it different things, whatever, but this dimension would need to include any sort of extremities, little screw heads or anything like that that sticks out. Now, if there is something that's like just real small and inconsequential for the most part, it may not make that huge of a difference. But if it's a big knob, like on the side, those tend to be a little bit more difficult to work around. So you would want to make sure that whatever this dimension is, you want to make sure that just like this, you want to include any sticky out bits. Now, if it's something that maybe you're using, like an accessory ground glass protector, one of those acrylic style ones, you want to maybe just let me know if you're going to send me a message. And maybe include some photos. That's actually a good thing. Show some photos of how you would store your camera away. Now, with most of my camera cases, I include an extra protective pad, which you can place on either the inside of the lid or on the inside of the base, and it adds an extra layer of foam to help protect the ground glass. But if you want to use a ground glass protector, you still can. You don't have to use that extra pad. You can throw it away if you want to. Some people use both. I have found just the extra layer of foam works fine for protecting a ground glass, particularly a smaller screen like a 4x5. So with that, it's the same thing as if you're measuring the thickness of how thick a camera is. Now, you'd want to know what that maximum thickness is. Now, if a lot of people, myself included, use a quick release plate, and those quick release plates add thickness. Just going to use this little cheapy Arca plate as an example. These add thickness to whatever the camera is. So I tend to account for adding about an extra 1/4 inch, so 6 mils up to about 3/8 of an inch, or around 10 millimeters, give or take, to whatever dimension has been given to me, to account for people who want to use a quick release plate. So that's kind of already taken in. Now the material can stretch a little bit, you know, the camera can poof out a little bit, the case, excuse me, can poof out a little bit. So it's not like a rigid box. It's not going to be able to close if you have a plate on it. That's one of the benefits with soft goods, is that they can flex a little bit. But again, if you have something that's one of those big, thick Manfrotto hexagonal plates with the big old thumb screw on it, which are somewhere probably like an inch, it adds like an inch to the dimension. Personally, I hate those plates, but that's me. What I do is I take that big thumb screw, that big brass or aluminum thumb screw that they have on them, and I take that out and I put a regular bolt through it into the camera. So it takes up a lot less height or a lot less dimension. It adds less because that extra bolt and all that extra stuff, that lock nut and that whole thing, just adds an extra super huge amount of dimension to it. So I recommend that people just go to the hardware store, buy a bolt of, you know, whether it be a 1/4 20 or 3/8 16, whatever the thread pattern is that your camera requires, get a bolt. If it's a countersink bolt with a flathead, that's best because it's a low profile, or a dome head or socket head cap screw. However you want to do it, I recommend replacing those thumb knobs with just a standard bolt because it's a little bit lower profile. It'll still hold perfectly fine. But going back to the dimensions, so again, if you have a quick release plate, you want to make sure that it can account for that. Because I have had people who said, hey, the case didn't fit. And I said, are you using a quick release plate? And they said, yes. And I said, are you using a Manfrotto or like a Bogen quick release plate, the hexagonal ones? And they said, yes. And I said, are you using the big thumb knob? And they're like, yes. I said, and I have to go through what I just told you about taking that bolt out, the stock thumb knob, excuse me, all words end of the day, and replacing it with just a regular bolt. And after that, it fits fine. But again, just a word of caution. So going back to measuring, another way, if for some reason you're having issues with parallax, like reading the tape measure and aligning it properly, I recommend get yourself a piece of paper like I have here, a piece of butcher's paper, or, you know, go to your market, talk to the butcher and say, hey, can I get some butcher's paper? Or just tape a couple of pieces of computer paper together, and then you can just trace around as accurately as possible. Now, a little bit outside of the shape is not a problem. A little bit bigger is actually probably better, because it's better to be a little big than too small. So then you just hold this in place, make sure it doesn't shift, and then trace around. Make sure you're holding it so it doesn't shift as accurately as possible. Then you can take your camera away, and then you can measure like that. Now, I tend to round up. So if you said, okay, this is 195 millimeters, I would make that automatically just 200. So if that's the maximum dimension of where, or if, let's just say if it had these knobs, we're at about 230 millimeters. So if you said, oh, it's just a hair under 230, 225, I'd just go 230. I just prefer to err on the side of caution and just make that a little bit bigger. And then you would just measure it again. Okay, we're at 197. I'd just go to 200. It's easier just to make it slightly larger than too small. And then the same thing with the thickness. So if you want to measure it, you can. Most cameras will stand up when they're folded, and then you would just measure. Now this is where you can actually utilize something like a book or something that has a square edge, so it's 90 degrees. So we'll simulate this piece of acrylic here as if it was like a square. Now if you have a carpenter's square, that's actually ideal, because when you register off the table, so then what you can do is you can say, okay, this is here, and then what you can do is you can hold the square. Sorry, my hand's in the way. Hold the square, just make a mark like that, put the camera back up. So this is where you're able to just accurately measure the maximum dimension of something. So let's just say it's out to here. So it's butting up against the base or whatever, against the quick release plate. So it's there, holding up there, then you can measure. Then you take your camera away and you just measure flat with a ruler, so we're at 90 millimeters. So there you go. I would probably bump that up to 100 millimeters just to account for a quick release plate on there if somebody had that. I tend to just add a little bit, plump it up the given dimensions just to account for any error in measurement. But this is kind of the easiest way that I've found to be able to measure smaller, odd-shaped items more accurately, especially if it's like a 35 millimeter camera or something that's kind of odd shape that it's kind of hard to accurately do that with. Just trace it out, and making sure that your tracing is just slightly larger than the object itself. The outline on the paper is just slightly larger than the item itself. But there you go. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comment below. Be happy to answer them as best as I can. Be cross-posting this to both Instagram as well as YouTube. I don't post on YouTube very often, but it's an easy way to be able to point people to a video if they have any questions. But yeah, thanks for your time. I look forward to talking with you soon. Have a good day.